Week of Intro to Biology. This week we will be covering chapter 19.5 and then chapter 30. We will be covering a little bit about animal ecology today. This is one of my favorite topics, so I hope you guys enjoy it too. So echinoderms and chordates are put together in a group called deuterosomes because they develop in a similar pattern after fertilization, or after a sperm and an egg come together. Echinoderms include sea stars and sea urchins. Sea cucumbers have a long, green, leathery body with feeding tentacles around the mouth. Sea urchins, sea urchins and sand dollars have spines for locomotion, defense, and burrowing. Echinoderms will have two stages of life. During their larval stage, there will be free-swimming filter feeders that have bilateral symmetry. And bilateral symmetry will mean that they will have identical body parts on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side of their body. As adults, they will be radially symmetrical, and they will not have a head, brain, or segmentation. Radially symmetrical means that they will be symmetrical around a circle. And if you guys can picture a sea star, so pretend that all my hands are the arms of the sea star, and you know that they will have a circle around the center of their body, and then each of the arms are going to be identical to each other. So around this one circle, all of the arms will be identical to each other, and so sea stars are radially symmetrical. The nerve ring, so if you're still imagining the sea star, around the center of the sea star is going to be a nerve ring around the mouth that extends outward, and this allows them to be able to move around the sand floor, or around the ocean floor, through a water vascular system. And they are able to do this by pumping water in and out of their water sieve and kind of like blowing water out of this mouth here to help them move around. They also have tube feet, which produce suction, which also helps them move around too. Even though they do have this really great water vascular system, they will be lacking in respiratory, excretory, and circulatory systems, which would just be like our lungs, our digestive system, or our blood vessels. Fluids in the coelomic cavity and water vascular system will instead carry out all these functions that instead our organ systems will allow us to do. Adult echinoderms, like the sea star here, are radially symmetrical, meaning that each of the 5 legs, which is around the central disc, are going to be identical, like I explained a little earlier. Locomotion is going to be achieved by pumping water through the body, which creates a suction power, allowing it to slowly move across the sand. And again, there is going to be no respiratory or excretory systems, but they can get oxygen across their skin gills and across their tube feet. Nitrogenous waste diffuse across the coelomic cavity and to the anus. The next animal group we'll talk about are the chordates. There are both invertebrate chordates and vertebrate chordates. And real quick, chordates generally just mean that they have a backbone. So most animals that you can think of are going to be chordates. So dogs, cats, humans, monkeys, lions, wolves, they're all going to have some type of backbone that helps support their body. But there are also going to be invertebrate chordates, which just means that they're not going to have a spine. But all chordates share 4 characteristics in common. Although these 4 characteristics do not need to be present throughout most of their life. Each of these 4 characteristics has to be present at some point in their life. Some of the invertebrate chordates will have some of these characteristics only in the infantile stage versus the adult stage. And those 4 characteristics are the dorsal supporting rod, called a notochord. In invertebrates, the notochord is the vertebrae, or will turn into the vertebrae that make up the spine. All chordates have dorsal tubular nerve cords that connects the brain to the rest of the body. Pharyngeal pouches are only seen during embryonic development in most vertebrates. In fish, the pharyngeal pouches become functioning gills, while in humans these become the auditory system that you'll find in your ears, tonsils, the thymus gland, and the parathyroids. The last characteristic is a postnatal tail. And a lot of the vertebrates have tails, but in humans the postanal tail instead becomes a coccyx bone. So all vertebrates from tunicates, which is one of the invertebrate chordates, up until the mammals will share these 4 different characteristics. So I'm going to pull out my laser pointer. So the dorsal tubular nerve cord is the blue part here that is going to be on the most outer part of the animal. The nodal cord is going to be that red line there, just underneath the dorsal tubular nerve cord. The pharyngeal pouches are going to be just underneath the dorsal tubular nerve cord at the upper part of the body. And then the postnatal tail is going to be more toward the bottom part of the organism. Some chordates do not develop into vertebrates, like the tunicate and the lancelet. Tunicates live on the ocean floor and are also called sea squirts because they squirt water from their siphons whenever they're disturbed. The larva on tunicates has all 4 chordate characteristics, but will lose all of these characteristics except the gill slits as an adult. As an adult, the tunicate remains stationary and will gather food from the water as it filters it through the siphons. Lancelets are marine chordates only a few centimeters long. They get their name by the appearance of a surgical knife. As they grow into adults, they will retain all 4 chordate characteristics. As adults, lancelets hang out about halfway through the ocean floor where they will collect food through the water that they filter. So there are different physical trends among chordates that we'll be able to see. You will generally see the presence of a vertebrae or spine. Generally you will see jaws, a bony skeleton, lungs, jointed appendages, so just like the joints you find in your elbow or the knee in your leg, an amniotic egg, so if you just can imagine a chicken egg, that would be an amniotic egg, and then mammillary glands, which is going to be common, of course, among mammals. So the first group we'll look into are the fishes, and there's going to be 3 main groups of fishes. There's going to be jawless fishes, which is just like it sounds. These fish will not have jaws. There's going to be cartilaginous fishes, which instead of a true bony skeleton, their bones will be made out of cartilage. And then bony fishes, which their skeletons will just be made out of bone. So jawless fishes are cylindrical and up to a meter long. Will have smooth, scaleless skin, no jaws or paired fins. Jawless fish include hagfish and lampreys. Lampreys are native to the Great Lakes, which is just a little bit northeast of Indiana. Hagfish are scavengers, and most lampreys are going to be parasites. They're parasitic because they attach their mouths to the animal, and will tap into their circulatory system. Lampreys are unique though because they don't take in water through their mouths. Instead, they will take it in through their gills. Cartilaginous fishes include sharks, skates, and rays. These do not have true bones. Instead, they will have skeletons made of cartilage. The hammerhead shark is considered to be the most dangerous shark in the oceans. Skates and rays are flat fishes that live partly buried in the sand and will feed on mussels and clams. Sharks and rays have three well-developed senses that help them hunt prey. They can detect electrical currents, like those made by muscle contractions in the water. So any fish swimming nearby, they will be able to sense them through the electrical currents that are given off by their muscles when they swim near them. They and a lot of other fishes have a lateral line system that can sense pressure caused by a fish or an animal swimming nearby. And the lateral line system will pretty much just be a line that will be along the middle of their body. Sharks also have a good sense of smell. The part of the brain associated with smell is twice as large as that of other brains. Sharks can detect about 1 drop in 25 gallons of water. It's crazy. So the lamprey's mouth ends up being circular since they do not have a jaw. Since lampreys will attach to their prey and cannot take up water for air as they do this, instead lampreys will take up water through their gills for oxygen. Sharks, on the other hand, will have jaws that will add support. To their mouth, but they do not have true bones. Instead, their bones are going to be made up of that softer material called cartilage. Sharks do not have a swim bladder like a lot of fishes do, and these swim bladders are very important for helping fish stay afloat in the water. As a result, the shark has to keep swimming so that it doesn't sink, and to keep water flowing through their gills so that they can get enough oxygen. If they did stop swimming, then they would actually end up suffocating. So the swim bladder is going to be located above the other organs and just underneath the spine. So here is the swim bladder, above the other organs here and just below the spine. And the spine is just like ours. It's going to contain those different small pieces of bone called vertebrae. The scales of the fish, which is you can think of as skin, will help protect the fish and prevent any water loss from the inside of their body. The next animal group we'll talk about are amphibians. I'm sure these are very familiar to you guys. They include frogs, toads, newts, and salamanders. Amphibian actually means that the animal lives in both water and on land. And there's going to be at least 2 stages of life. The larva is going to live in water, but the adult is going to live on the land near the water. They have a lot of characteristics not seen in bony fishes, including jointed limbs, eyelids, ears, sound-producing larynx, a larger brain, and a 3-chambered heart. Larvae have gills, but as they change or metamorphosize into adults, they will lose their gills and instead get lungs, although they are going to be a bit smaller than you would expect. Gas exchange can also occur through the skin. Amphibians will have larger hearts and pump oxygen into the lungs and the skin to gain oxygen and lose carbon dioxide. Some amphibians do not have a larva stage. Some salamanders and frogs will develop directly into their adult bodies. Because they lack the tadpole stage, the eggs are not laid in the water like most amphibians are. The gastric brooding frog and Darwin's frog will use a unique method to raise their young. Because amphibians do not have scales and absorb gases through their skin, they are going to be very susceptible to any water pollution and are going to be one of the very few species that will be affected by any type of pollution that can be found in water. The next group of animals we'll talk about are the reptiles. Because reptiles do not live or reproduce in the water, they will have several more characteristics than the amphibians. Reptiles have scales that protect them and keep them from drying out since they aren't always around water. Their lungs are going to be more developed than amphibians, however their hearts are going to be the same size. Amphibians do not have shelled eggs because the eggs are laid in water and therefore don't dry out. Because reptiles lay their eggs on land, their eggs do need a shell so they don't dry out, and this is what is called an amniotic egg. So here's a picture of an amniotic egg right here. And this particular amniotic egg is that of an American crocodile. And in the top picture here, you can see the American crocodile hatching out of their shells. The American crocodile egg tends to be leathery and flexible. Inside the egg, the embryo is going to be surrounded by the extraembryonic membranes. The chorion on the very outside is for gas exchange. The yolk sac here provides nutrition. The allantois, which is just right here, is going to store any waste. And then the amnion here, which just surrounds the amnion right here, which is just on the outside of the embryo, is going to prevent the embryo from drying out and adds a layer of protection. All the extraembryonic membranes are going to eliminates the need for a watery environment for development. So all of the aforementioned animals are ectothermic, which means they cannot regulate their own body temperature. Or you may have heard the term cold-blooded, which pretty much just means the same thing. Instead, they have to move to warmer or colder areas in order to regulate their body temperature. All of the following animals that we will be talking about instead are endothermic or warm-blooded animals, and that just means that they can regulate their own body temperature either through sweating or to cool down their body, or our muscles using more glucose or moving a lot more, or us moving around a lot more to help raise our body temperature. So birds are similar to reptiles in that they will also lay amniotic eggs. Every structural feature of a bird is created so that it can fly as best as it can. The bones are not like ours, but instead are hollow with air cavities. So because their bones have these air cavities, the bones aren't going to be as heavy, which allows them to not have to carry as much weight with them as they fly. They will have narrow beaks instead of tooth-square jaws. The torso is compact and aerodynamic. The feathers are structured so that the air flows freely over the body without creating a draft. The lungs are made of air sacs. Which are light and allows the bird's muscles to get oxygen quickly. The heart has one more chamber than the reptiles do, which just means that they can pump blood more efficiently throughout the body. So the feathers here are made of a single shaft where the barbs and the branched barbules sprout from. The barbules will lay over the barbs, which keeps the barbs close together and neat. This prevents water from getting to the skin and keeps the bird smooth and more aerodynamic. Here you can see that birds have various kinds of beaks, and birds' beaks are matched according to their diet. In the top picture you see a cardinal, and it's very thick, so it allows to crack through really big nuts. A flamingo's beak instead allows it to strain food from the water with bristles that fringe the mandibles, or that will fringe the outside of the mouth, or just the inside of the mouth. A bald eagle's sharp beak will allow it to tear through its prey. Mammals are different from the reptiles, fish, and amphibians because their young develop on the inside of them. Instead of eggs, mammals have placenta that serve the same functions as the chorion, the allantois, and the yolk sac in the eggs. The embryos are still going to be surrounded by an amniotic sac, though. When a woman's water breaks, it's the amniotic sac that breaks. The two defining characteristics of mammals are going to be the hair and the mammillary glands. Both are going to serve as protection for the mammals. The hair provides insulation, and the mammillary glands protects the young because the mothers don't have to leave the baby to find food. The mammillary glands also tells us something about the development of the infants. Because mammals feed their young, babies take longer to develop, and mammals don't have as many babies per litter. Reptiles and amphibians generally do not take care of their young, and as a result, the babies grow up really fast to take care of themselves. And because there is not much parental protection, a lot of the babies are born per litter in hopes that some will live long enough to reproduce. Because there are exceptions to every biological rule, we have marsupials and monotremes. Marsupials do not fully develop inside the mother. Instead, an immature embryo will crawl outside of the mother's uterus and into a pouch that is going to be around their stomach. And the embryo will attach to a mammillary gland and will stay there until it fully develops. Marsupials are mainly found in Australia, but the one marsupial that is going to be found in America is the Virginia opossum. Monotremes do not give live birth. Instead, they do lay eggs. Monotremes include the spiny anteater and duck-billed platypuses. These animals have a cloaca like birds, and a cloaca is just when there's going to be one hole for any feces, urine, and eggs or sperm to come out of. The duck-billed platypus will lay on their eggs until they hatch, and then the young licks up milk that will come from the mother's mammillary glands. So here we have the spiny anteater, the opossum, and the koala. The spiny anteater has a pouch on the side, formed by the swollen mammillary glands and some muscles. After the hatching of the eggs takes place in this pouch, and that's where the young will remain for 53 days. Then they stay in a burrow where the mother nurses them. The opossum and koala young crawl to the pouch where they fuse with the nipple to receive milk until they are weaned. The majority of mammals will have a placenta, which just replaces the need for the egg. Mammals have a well-developed brain, a four-chambered heart, and are distinguished amongst one another by their methods of attaining food or locomotion. And there are many different kinds of mammals. The deer are herbivorous and live in temperate forests, like as you would find around the Midwest. Lions are carnivorous and live in the savanna, like those found in Africa. Monkeys are omnivorous and live in various habitats all around the world on just about every continent. And dolphins and whales are carnivores that you'll find in the ocean. So the placenta in mammals replaces the chorion, the atlantos, and the yolk sac within eggs. Because it provides the baby with nutrients, oxygen, and waste removal. The placenta attaches to the outside of just inside the uterus, right here, and attaches to the uterus, and the umbilical cord arises from it, and then goes into the baby. The amniotic sac surrounds the fetus, and provides a safe environment for the baby to develop. African elephants and orangutans are other examples of placental animals. An African elephant's gestation period is 22 months. You can detect about a heartbeat within 2.5 of those months. And African elephant babies will have to drink 20 pints of milk a day within the first 4 months. Orangutan's gestation period is very similar to humans, about 8 to 9 months. They will nurse for 4 to 5 months and then stay with the mom for 8 to 9 months. And then human fetuses, their heartbeat can be detected within just 3 to 4 weeks after conception. So now we'll move on to chapter 30. So ecology is the study of the environmental roles of all the animals we just talked about. Studying the behavior of all those animals not only tells us a lot about those animals, but also important information on how these animals survive and how we can help them survive. Ecology involves the study of the several levels of biological organization. We're going to start off very simply with the organism. and the organism focuses on anatomy and behavior of that animal. Population are going to be made up of a lot of the same organisms, and populations are the individuals in a species that will interact with each other. A community is all the various populations at a particular location, and so like within Fort Wayne, Indiana, the population of the white-tailed deer are going to interact with the population of the skunks, that are going to interact with the population of caterpillars, that'll interact with the population of the red maples that it might create its cocoon on, and so on and so forth. The ecosystem is going to be the interaction between the living organisms and their physical environment. So that's going to be the plants and animals in interaction with like the rocks and nutrients that you can find. And then the biosphere, of course, is the portion of the Earth's surface. The biosphere is where all the various different ecosystems are interacting with each other. And the main form of way that they're going to interact with each other is through weather systems. So here's a good example of the organization you can find within a coral reef. So the organisms we have here is a clownfish. And clownfish can be yellow, orange, or reddish or blackish color. And many will show these white patches. They can range in size from 7 to 16 centimeters. Clownfish live in sea anemones where they have a symbiotic relationship with the coral. A population of clownfish live in groups where there is going to be one dominant female. Only one male and one female will reproduce in this group. If the breeding female dies, then the breeding male will switch genders and become female. After the eggs are fertilized, the males will tend to them until they hatch. Within their community, clownfish and sea anemones will have symbiotic relationships, and this just means that they will benefit from each other. They can protect each other from predators and amongst other things. Within the ecosystem, the clownfish will be searching for food, defending their territory, hiding from predators, and will be swimming alongside other fish. So ecology originally began as a part of natural history because scientists observed and described organisms in their environment. Now it's just an experimental science. Or now it has developed into an experimental science. The central goal is to develop models that can explain and predict the distribution and abundance of the various animal and plant populations based on their interactions within an ecosystem. Ecologists have come up with hypotheses, predictions, and experiments just like scientists in a lab would. Ecologists might formulate and test hypotheses about the role fires play in maintaining a certain forest. In this particular example, they are looking at what fire might do to a lodgepole pine forest. So they will record and observe information on the environment within the environment before the fire. They will then perform a prescribed burn, which pretty much means that they will use these gas canisters that will create a light fire around the forest floor. So it's a contained fire, pretty much. And then they will observe the pine forest within like every couple of weeks, every couple of months, so that they can observe the changes within that pine forest after a fire. This will tell them a lot about how that particular plant species will respond to a fire. A good reason that they might do this is to find out different reproduction habitats, which there is actually a species of pine trees that can actually only reproduce when a fire comes through. This is because they have a waxy cone, and the female and male seeds that are located inside the pine cones can only come out if there's a fire that nearby, if a fire comes through. So ecologists play an important role in helping people understand how humans can live in harmony with nature. Ecologists are able to take their research and help humans get the resources they need with environmental science. Also, how to properly conserve the world we live in through sharing ecological principles through national parks, zoos, and science books. The characteristics of an animal population will change as the environment changes. The human population will change as climate change is taking effect and there are less resources to go around. The animal populations who are best able to adapt to these new environments will survive, and unfortunately those that aren't are more likely to go endangered and even extinct. A population will change in regard to the amount of resources they are offered. If the amount of resources go up, then so does the population. If the amount of resources go down, then so does the population. The location of resources will also influence the location of the animal population. Depending on the location of resources, a species population can be clumped together, randomly distributed, or uniformly spaced out. So for example, within a desert, there is a certain amount of water for the desert shrubs. While young, the desert shrubs do not need much water, so they tend to grow close together and will show this clumped pattern. As the shrubs age, the weaker ones die off because they can't get enough water. So the shrubs end up being randomly spaced out, as shown in this picture here. When the shrub matures, they are now uniformly spaced out, shown in this picture here, because each plant requires the same amount of water, and so are spaced out to provide each plant with the exact amount of water it needs. The amount of resources available to a population will determine whether that population grows or declines. The population growth rate is determined by the rate of individuals that are born and die each year. Demographics also influence the growth of population, and an example of a demographic will be age. Within a population, pre-reproductive describes animals who are too young to reproduce, so like children. Reproductive animals are old enough to reproduce, so like people in their late teens all the way up to their early 50s. And then post-reproductive animals are those that are too old to give birth. The age of all the individuals within a population will determine whether that population grows, remains stable, or declines. If there are more children and adults in a population, then the population will grow because the birth rate will exceed the death rate. If there are more older people, then the population will decrease since the death rate exceeds the birth rate. If, however, there are an equal number of children, adult, and senior citizens, then the population will remain stable. A population that is increasing in size is represented by a triangular graph. A decreasing population is represented by this top-heavy graph here, and a stable population is represented by a columnar graph, as seen here. As can be seen, an increasing population has more young people, more of the post-reproductive and reproductive people. A decreasing population will have more senior citizens, or will have more of the post-reproductive organisms. And then a stable population is going to have about an even amount of the pre-reproductive, post-reproductive, and reproductive organisms. The population size is also influenced by how long each of the individuals live. This is called survivorship. Just because rats can have a lot of babies does not necessarily mean that their populations will grow really, really fast. This is because a lot of the baby rats are eaten as prey. This life table here explains the amount of doll sheep born in 1 year and how many of them died through a 15-year period. Doll sheep horns are very similar to trees in that they get a annual growth ring. Scientists looked at dead doll sheep to determine the age at which they died, and they found out that most doll sheep will survive until they are old. Life tables can be used to construct survivorship curves. There are three kinds of survivorship curves. Dowel shapes show a type 1 survivorship curve, shown by this purple line here. And this means that most individuals die when they are older. The Hydra shows a type 2 survivorship curve, shown by this line here, or this red line here. And this shows that the Hydra has an equal opportunity of dying at any stage of life. The oysters, on the other hand, will have this type 3 survivorship curve, or an L-shaped survivorship curve, and this just means that most of the young will end up dying, and that very few of the oysters end up surviving into their post-reproductive stage. When ecologists are trying to find ways to increase the population of an endangered species, they need to fully understand a species' biotic potential. This is the highest, and biotic potential is the highest rate of increase for a population when there are unlimited amount of food and habitat. The biotic potential is determined by the availability of resources and the natural history of that animal species. The ecologists need to look how often the animal reproduces, how many offspring they have per litter, the likelihood of the offspring making it into adulthood. If the biotic potential is low, then the ecologist needs to try to find out ways to increase the amount of resources available to that species and enough protection to make sure an individual animal is taken care of. If the biotic potential is high, then the ecologist has to worry more about the resources than each individual animal. Animals who reproduce all year, have a lot of babies per litter, and mature quickly are said to have a high biotic potential. Animals that reproduce less frequently only have 1 or 2 babies at a time, and mature slowly are said to have a low biotic potential. Resources are important to animals in both groups. However, the individuals in the species with a low biotic potential need to be protected more than those with a high biotic potential. Those with a low biotic potential are much more susceptible to habitat and food loss than those with a high biotic potential. When the resources are high for an animal, especially one with a high biotic potential, the population will continue growing until it reaches something called a carrying capacity. And this is the most animals an environment can hold at any given moment. It is based on the amount of space and food offered to those animals. As an animal populations rise, they will go through several different growth patterns. First, exponential growth, and then logistic growth. When an animal population with few individuals is given unlimited resources, it will first experience a lag phase, and this just is because there's very few individuals that are reproducing. As more individuals start reproducing, then the population will grow really fast and enter into the exponential growth phase. Similar to, you can think of this in the same way you can think of a savings account. If you start off with $2,000 and you have a 20% monthly interest rate, that first month you'll have $2,400. The second month you'll have $2,880. The third month you'll have $3,456, and so on and so on. The growth rate will start. The growth will start off slow, but then speeds up pretty quickly. So exponential growth is represented by this J-shaped curve here. So here you can see the lag phase, when very few individuals are reproducing. But as some of the babies grow up and are able to reproduce, and we have more individuals reproducing, we will then enter into that exponential growth phase, where we'll see just an explosion in the amount of animals in this population. As the animal population reaches its carrying capacity, then the population will experience a logistic growth period. And this is when the population will start to fluctuate between increasing and decreasing numbers around that carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is defined as the amount of individuals that can be supported as the amount of carrying capacity is defined as the amount of individuals that can be supported in an environment just based on the amount of food and habitat available. If the amount of resources remains constant, the number of individuals at the carrying capacity will fluctuate. This is because as more individuals are born, there's going to be more competition for the food and habitat, and thus some of the animals will die. This leaves more resources for the ones that are alive, thus causing them to reproduce more, and the population will grow a little. This increases the competition among them again, and so causing the population to go down, and the cycle just continues around there. In Indiana, we are seeing a lot of deforestation to make room for more businesses and homes. And this causes the carrying capacity of many animals and plants to go down as the amount of habitat and plant decreases. Habitat and food decreases, sorry. So here you can see all of the different growth periods. So here we're looking at a rainbow trout, it looks like. So here we have very few individuals we have a few different trout within our body of water here. So we have few individuals breeding, and so we're only going to see a small increase in population size. But as the young ones grow up and they start able to reproducing, then we're going to see a sharp increase in the animal population. Here we have the carrying capacity, which just shows us how much habitats and food is available to our trout species. And once our population starts reaching that carrying capacity, then we're going to enter into the logistic growth phase. And so our animal population, or our trout population, has maxed out the carrying capacity, and so some of the individuals will die off. Well, now we have more now we have more food and habitat to go around, so we'll see our population increase a little bit more. But now we've reached our carrying capacity again, and so our population starts to decrease again, and our population will fluctuate around that carrying capacity. Unless that carrying capacity, our animal population can increase if our carrying capacity increases, so if we get more habitat or if more food was available for that, for our trout species, or our carrying capacity could become lower, and so causing our trout species numbers to decrease even more since there's less plants, since there's less food and habitat to go around for our trouts. Humans can use this knowledge to our advantage. If humans want to maintain a particular animal population, then they need to make sure that there is enough resources and individuals so the animal population experiences the exponential growth rate. For example, humans need to maintain our lakes and rivers and not to overfish, so we don't push the fish population into the lag phase, where the population cannot maintain itself and will decrease the amount of fish for us to fish for. However, if humans want to get rid of a pest, like the insects that could eat crops, for example, then they will need to reduce the carrying capacity by reducing the amount of resources available. For example, if a farmer wants to get rid of certain insects, then they can alternate the crops that they plant that they plant in each row. This limits the insect's ability to spread throughout the same plant species. There are many factors that influence the size of an animal population, both living and non-living factors. Non-living factors like weather and natural disasters are called density-independent factors. This just means that the size of the animal population does not determine the intensity of that natural disaster. For example, a flood will kill whatever animals it does, regardless of how large that original animal population was. Even though density-independent factors can cause drastic reductions in animal populations, these factors do not consistently regulate the size of the animal population. We don't rely on floods to keep, for example, we do not rely on floods to keep animal populations down. Floods are random and cannot be regulated. In this particular scenario, there are two populations of mice. One has 5 and the other has 20. The population with 5 mice will experience a 60% death rate because just 3 mice drowned. The second population experienced the same death rate, but saw a larger amount of individuals die. Therefore, the flood devastated both populations regardless of the size of the original population. Density-dependent factors will affect the population based on how large or how small it is. The larger the population, the more individuals affected. The smaller the population, the less individuals affected. Density-dependent factors are those that are caused by the animals themselves, like competition, predation, and parasitism. Competition is defined as a competition between or within the animal and plant species. For example, they need to compete to find a place to live, to find food, and to find mates to reproduce with. The more individuals there are, the greater the competition, and the more individuals that will experience loss and suffer. So here we have competition within woodpeckers. So woodpeckers are within this scenario are competing for a nesting site. Each pair will require a tree hole to raise offspring. If there are more holes in pairs, then every pair will get a hole. If there are more birds than holes, then more birds will die because they don't have enough resources. Another density-dependent factor is predation. Predation includes carnivores eating meat and herbivores eating plants. Just like with competition, the more prey population there is, the greater the predation is. More prey means fewer hiding places and more exposed prey to feed upon. So in this scenario, we have hawks hunting mice. Mice must have a hole in order to avoid being eaten. If there are 102 mice but only 100 holes, 2 mice are in the open. If neither is eaten, then the predation rate is 0. If there are 200 mice and 100 holes, then there are 100 mice in the open. If 50 of these mice are eaten, the predation rate is going to be 50%. Competition within the species and the predation rate are increased as the amount of mice went up. Because of these density-dependent factors, predator and prey relationships tend to go through cycles of growth and decline. The famous example of the snowshoe hare and Canada lynx showed that as prey populations increased, then predator populations increased as well, which then caused the prey populations to decline, and eventually led to the predator population declining. When the lynx were denied access to the hares, the hare populations increased based on the amount of twigs available, which is what they would eat in their diet. In this example, there are two biotic factors affecting the snowshoe hare population. The amount of twigs they could find, and then the amount of the lynx that could hunt them. Without the predators, the hare population is going to be based on the amount of those twigs that are available. And then with predators, the population of the hares is going to be based on the amount of twigs available and the amount of lynx there are. Different types of organisms tend to experience two different patterns of life history. Life history refers to a population behavioral characteristics. Insects and weeds have an opportunistic life history pattern. Mammals and other animals have an equilibrium life history pattern. Insects and weeds are small in size, will mature quickly, have short lifespans, and provide limited, if any, parental care. These are not affected by competition and predation as much as other organisms are. Their population tends to be more regulated by weather or other natural disasters. These organisms have a high dispersal capacity, which means that they can spread from place to place pretty quickly, and so their populations will generally experience that exponential growth rate. These organisms are able to adapt quickly to various kinds of changes that they might find in their environment. Dandelions are a good example of an opportunistic species, as they are always found in your lawn and are really hard to get rid of. Animals who are larger in size, slower to mature, have longer lifespans and provide parental care, show equilibrium life history patterns. These animal populations are highly affected by predation and competition, and not so much affected by natural disasters. As a result, the population numbers tend to stay near the carrying capacity and experience the logistic growth patterns. And a good example of an animal with an equilibrium life history pattern are brown bears. Unfortunately, equilibrium species are more likely to go adapt than the opportunistic species. And this is just because equilibrium species are not able to tolerate too much change in their environment, especially when it comes to different things that they might eat or different habitats that they might try to live in. For example, a panda bear is not able to tolerate much change in their diet like some other animals will. A panda bear will only eat bamboo versus a raccoon that is more apt to change, or that can tolerate change a lot more, since they can just about eat anything. So a panda bear is more likely to experience a decrease in population than raccoons will. Ecologists can determine the likelihood of a species going extinct based on the distribution of the species, how much habitat change it can tolerate, and the size of the local populations. The vulnerability of a species to extinction is tied to range, habitat, and the size of that population. The number of strikes in the boxes indicate the chances and causes of extinction. The gorilla is more likely to go extinct than the tiger because the gorilla only lives in northern Africa, needs a specific habitat, and has a small population, in comparison to the tiger, who, also having a small population, lives in more places and in various habitats.